Hello, I'm Ben. Welcome to the channel. So today we're going to be talking about a book that I read recently by Scott Huesing, and he is a major in the United States Marine Corps. He is retired. A quote from him in the inside leaf of the book is, "In war, destruction is everywhere. It eats everything around you, and sometimes it eats you." The book is Echo in Ramadi. It's the first-hand story of the United States Marines in Iraq's deadliest city. So the Marines of Echo Company went in and cleared out Ramadi, basically. They went street to street, house to house, were door kickers, and did the rough stuff, right? To basically search every house for ordnance and things that people weren't supposed to have, and hunt for insurgents, which is definitely difficult to do. And you got to think, in a war that lasts 20 years, you create a lot of enemies, right? I mean, you kill kids and cousins and family of people, and those people who weren't enemies before would be now because they've had loved ones that they've lost because of the war effort. And then there's, of course, the people that they're fighting against, ISIS being the key, but Al-Qaeda and any of those operatives, they have pretty brutal tactics on what they do to people. And so what this book, it goes through and tells almost day by day what the young men went through that were there and how it worked. And I'm going to read a few little excerpts. This actually came from chapter 11. And here's what it says. Throughout the action, the Marines had expended over 50,000 rounds of 5.56, which is AR-15 ammo, 7.62, which is 308 ammo, and 50 cal, which is the big ammo for the 50 caliber machine guns. Combined, we devastated the enemy with countless 120 millimeter tank rounds, shoulder-fired rockets, and lobbed dozens of M67 high-explosive hand grenades into enemy positions. In addition, the multiple GMLRS Gimblers rocket strikes. These are heavy rockets that you can call down, and they'll take an entire house down. But they go floor by floor, and they burn it from the inside, so they melt pretty much anything that's alive in there. A task force had already credited the Marines of Echo Company with over 50 enemy AIF killed and dozens more enemy wounded. The numbers were impressive. We detained countless more that were on the task force's most wanted list of high-value individuals, or HVIs. So in that little section, in that engagement there that Echo went through, it lasted for days. And they were satisfied with the outcomes. He said, as satisfied as we were with our performance, we knew more hard fighting was way ahead of us, and the Marines were ready. So basically 50 enemy KIA, but it was 50,000 rounds rather, equals 50 enemy killed. So roughly 1,000 rounds per enemy killed. That's insane. And during that event, only one U.S. Marine was killed, and that lasted several days. Of course, we don't want to lose a U.S. Marine, but this kind of tells you the kind of pain that they're pouring out there. And then later on, a few chapters later, it talked about damage, specifically collateral damage and people that got wounded inside of the war effort that actually weren't fighting. They were just civilians that lived around this. And basically, the Arab families there got used to taking what was called a diya. That's spelled D-I-Y-A. And it's pronounced diya, and essentially it's non-negotiable payments of blood money. It's customary, if not downright expected, in the cases of accidental deaths. So basically you would go up to a grief-stricken mother or father and give them money for the loss of their child or family member, etc. And typically Iraqis had a very fatalistic view, kind of like the old Stoic view, fata mori, or mora fati, which is basically just love your fate. They said inshallah, which basically means if God wills it, or as we might say, God willing. So it was just a civil affair where if you killed somebody's family, you gave them a payment, and that's how they took it. Of course, the soldiers typically don't forget that if they kill a civilian by accident. I saw a civilian killed one time, and it jacked up the young man that was involved. So the next is further, and this was them highlighting the gear that they took with them. This book is great. It goes through feelings that people are feeling, but specifically it follows this gentleman as he is leading his troops through this war in Ramadi, Major Scott Huesing, and he loses some guys, and it kind of tells you how that works and kind of tells you how he felt when he was speaking to the families and the gratitude that the families had that he actually reached out. And while he was serving, two of his sons were serving in the military as well. So he had no idea what was going on with his sons. And his wife, basically, here she is, her husband and her two sons were at war in different places, which, that puts people in danger. The military changed how we send young folks to war. You don't send multiple family members to the same place because of the likelihood that they may be killed. But statistically, the farther people are spread out, the more likelihood in this war, which we were there for 20 years, so it's a war of occupation, everywhere is dangerous. So you kind of run into some statistical anomalies where it's more dangerous for people to be in separate places because the engagements were happening everywhere at all times. So this piece is talking about the heavy power they took in, and this is what they got. We rolled in with a ton of combat power, 2 AH-1W Cobra attack helicopters. Those are the fast mover Cobras. A platoon of LAV-25s or LAV-25S, which is armored with 25 millimeter Bushmaster chain guns. If you ever heard of chain gun, it basically cut a building down. The bullets are in such fast repetition that it's almost like a solid thing, which is why it's called a chain. 8 up armored Humvees with 50 caliber machine guns and 40 millimeter MK-19 grenade launchers, and 6 massive Oshkosh 7-ton trucks that were fully armored and strapped with turret-mounted machine guns. The Marines of Echo Company were loaded down with ammo to feed the 10 M240B medium machine guns and 30 5.56 squad automatic weapons, 5 shoulder-fired multiple launch weapons, or SMAWs, small rocket systems, as well as the ammo they carry for the M16A4 Colt rifles and Colt M4 carbines. When you think about that kind of firepower cruising in on a company like that, that's a force that really most people can't stand against. One of the things I thought that was cool about this book, though, he mentioned the fact that the Iraqis are the insurgents inside of Iraq. And that's the thing you have to think about. The second half of the war, we were fighting with Iraq to avoid their country of these insurgents, right? Because these insurgents would kill families at will. So the soldiers were trying to do what they could to remove these people, and they found out that even though our technology was so far superior, that they were still able to work around it. They would go straight Stone Age, which means you couldn't track them on GPS. They kept their faces covered, so there was no facial recognition with cameras and distance and things like that. The techniques were old school, and they worked. In the insurgent activities, it's natural. When you think about bush war or guerrilla war, that comes from all native tribes. Like in the United States, our native tribes fought great guerrilla war tactics. And it's always total war, right? So in the native wars, no one was safe. Women, children, no one was safe. If you were a combatant, or if you were of a different tribe, they would attack you. Women and children they would take and basically assimilate them into their tribe, and most men were killed in scout. Those war tactics have not changed over time. And predating those times, the tactics were just as brutal. So war has never been anything pretty. In this book, it goes through that, but it tells you how still specifically relevant those old school tactics are, even against the heavy weapons that they're talking about there. One of the best things about the book is in the back chapter, the last 3 or 4 pages, he goes through to talk about his soldiers and the ones who he served with and who added to the book to basically remember the stories. And I thought that was pretty great that he kept in touch with his troops. So give that a read. It's actually, if you're curious about, this was a brutal place for a very long time. And these guys are the ones that ended that and kind of gave control back to the Iraqi army. And in this, the Iraqi army wasn't living up to, they went from being just a visual thing to actually being a legitimate army that could take care of their country. And that's what you hear in this book. It went from being a PC campaign where you turn stuff over to the Iraqi army, and they'd come in and foobar it. They'd screw it up because they weren't legitimate. But over the time, they evolved into a legitimate force to secure and protect their country, which is kind of what you hope happens after we leave. So the war on terror, or that portion of it, is now over. After 20 years, the longest war in American history, there's some stuff that's coming up now about some plans just to keep America at war. And some of the things that have been suggested, and obviously it's got nothing to do with the soldiers, okay? So when you say this, the soldiers have nothing to do with this. They're called and they go, which is as noble as it comes. But it's turned out that our government, our federal government, which is probably the most evil entity in the world, is laundering a bunch of money through warfare. So basically we attack places and these corporations pour huge amounts of money into the war, which is then washed through the war effort and goes back and is paid to politicians. And of course, in our Constitution and in our limitations, we never limited the terms that these clowns could keep in office with the exception of the president. So these people are making billions and billions of dollars a year. And that's one of the things that America is now dealing with, is these despicable politicians that are making a living off of and making extreme wealth off of sending our soldiers and our military to their deaths in countries where they go and fight others. And unfortunately, that means in those countries, people are killed as well. So that's something that came to mind throughout the book, because they kind of questioned why they were where they were at a point, and the support wasn't what it was supposed to be, and it was as if they had been forgotten about, and just were in a meat locker in a world of hurt. And then when they left, there was 2 gentlemen that were killed on one roof in this book, and basically just left the building a few days later. And it didn't seem like it was relevant for them to be there at all. So just something to think about. War's not pretty. The ones that serve are to be thought of, I think, specifically on both sides. Not insurgents and not ISIS, not those people. They all belong in a very specific hole. But everyone else that fought for their own countries, like the Iraqi army and these excellent Marines, they deserve thanks and gratitude for the people that can live there now. And, for our country that we send our devil dogs out to do this work, you kind of have to think about what it is. And I think reading the stories matters. And I think about knowing the names matters. So give this book a look. Here is a review of the book that was written by Dale Dye, who is a United States Marine, who's also done some acting and is an author, and he was a Vietnam veteran and owner of Warriors Inc. He said, "This book demonstrates the nature of war and how the special spirit the Marines bring to the fight is virtually eternal. A fine, gripping look at what war is all about and the new generation of warriors." And I think here's one that's Oliver North. Most people know Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North. He's United States Marine Corps retired. He's the host of War Stories on Fox News and a best-selling author. And he was a star of primetime TV when I was a kid, because he was in a court case that lasted months and was explaining how our government screwed around with funds that they shouldn't have. But he says, Scott Huesing and the magnificent bastards he led in Iraq know the true face of war. Echo and Ramadi is a raw, first-hand account of how they persevered against harrowing odds in what was once the bloodiest place on earth. It's also an inspiring chronicle of the unwavering courage, remarkable compassion, and steadfast commitment of the United States Marine Corps and the individual United States Marine. The respect and devotion Huesing has for his Marines is apparent on every single page. If you or a loved one you know, or someone that you know has ever served in harm's way, Echo and Ramadi is an essential must-read. So I would agree with that. I think it's a great book. The book is Echo and Ramadi by retired Major Scott Huesing of the United States Marine Corps. Give it a look. I'm Ben. If you like this content, please subscribe to the channel and please share. Be good.